And good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's Fireside Chat. Today I'm joined by Ron Gauci, who is the go-to executive for organisations who are looking for significant growth, transformation, asset leverage, good governance and leadership. He's a popular keynote speaker who is described as an inspiration pracademic. We'll talk more about that. He has an extensive track record of rapidly achieving success regardless of how difficult the challenges through the development of a visionary strategic plan that all stakeholders buy into. He enjoys taking organisations yet to realise their growth opportunities, setting them on a journey of reaching that potential. Ron has an innate ability to navigate through complex environments and stakeholders, generating opportunity and growth despite any adversities, challenges or industry. He is recognised as an inspirational leader with a reputation for getting the best out of his teams and getting things done. Good morning, Ron, and welcome.
Thank you very much. How good is this to be able to in this environment?
Isn't it? It's so nice just to be able to connect and talk.
Correct.
Yeah, it is. It's sort of the highlight of my week, actually.
I was excited about it.
So tell us about what you wanted to be when you were young and you grew up and why.
Well, I don't know that I've actually grown up, to be honest, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So, look, I had a very full-on teenage life with my music and sport, and being the oldest of a family of 6. So there was it was just created all sorts of opportunities. So I left school to start doing law, and that's what I thought I wanted to do. Then I taught, and I got into the IT industry, and every phase has been a new exciting stage that has opened up a new growth opportunity. So I think I've got a long way to go before I grow up. And my grandchildren will say I haven't grown up at all. So, yeah.
Excellent. And, you know, given the fact that you've had so many sort of diverse career changes, what sort of moments have you had that have really been significant? So you went sort of from being a lawyer into technology, and then you've ended up in sport. And so how has that actually all come about?
I think it's about discoveries.
Right.
So I didn't actually complete that stage of the law course. So I decided to move into teaching because I thought I wanted to teach kids and teenagers how to avoid having to need me as a lawyer. So that was a discovery, a personal discovery, okay. And I really enjoyed the teaching. And then this was about the mid-80s, the Apple IIe made its way into a classroom. I was teaching law, politics and history, so I didn't know how to spell IT at that point, but there were these computers, and that computer, or those computers opened up a teaching concept of how to teach differently. Right. And we developed some software to assist with the teaching of commercial studies, which ended up on the market, which 18 months later, there I was working for Microsoft with Bill Gates as my two-up. So that was a discovery, a discovery of a new way of doing something that created new opportunities. Likewise, I was coaching at that point in time in sport, and I was using both different techniques and technology, and then that created an opportunity to work with sporting clubs, which resulted in, you know, the rest is history sort of stuff. So, so every stage for me has been about a new discovery, and I think that starts with me. If I go back to conversations that recruiters and managers have with you, they ask you what it is that you want out of your next role. I can never answer that question. What I can answer is what I don't want in the next role.
Yeah, right.
And by leaving that open sort of environment or that open question, that creates all sorts of opportunities in itself.
Yeah.
Whereas if I knew what I wanted, I'd probably end up there, because I often say people always end up where they put themselves. So by leaving the canvas clean and open, then who knows what can happen. And to me, I've been very, very fortunate the experiences I've had as a result of being very open-minded.
Yeah. And so when you say, you know, you were able to say things that you didn't want, what was that sort of, what did that look like? Like, was that based on sort of learnings from people that you'd worked with, or just your own personal preferences? What was that?
And a whole lot of things.
Yeah, right.
It could be, I don't want to work in this sort of culture. I don't want to work for this sort of organisation. I don't want to work with these sort of people. So I have some basic rules around that. So I certainly don't want to be in an environment of negativity. I want to be in a creative environment. So anything that suppresses that innovation or creativity or allowing good people to be great. So one of my principles that I talk to is the importance as a manager of not being there to motivate people, because motivation needs to come from within. For me, my role as a manager is to remove the demotivators, those things that organisations put up that actually stop good people from being great. So what I look to not do is go into organisations where there's all those blockers and all those demotivators. So that's just an example of, I guess, a number of principles that I have that I look for when I contemplate new opportunities.
And in this sort of COVID-19 world, what's an average day look like for you at the moment, and sort of how are you managing? We were having a bit of a laugh before. You were saying that you're not really enjoying Zoom meetings because you don't like the fact you can see yourself. But what are you doing sort of differently, and how are you coping and managing your team?
Well, I do like this sort of engagement. So whilst the technology is great, and I'm in the technology industry, so obviously I'd advocate for that. And the technology has given us some great advantages and great leverage and great benefit, no question. But I have discovered that I'm not very good working with myself in my own space. And I do like the little engagements, the little things that can happen in an office. We're in a great facility at the Good Shed in Collins Street, and there's so many different people and so many different environments and experiences, and you bump into people and meet new people. You can't do that in the current situation. So that's the first part. What we have learnt though is the importance of making sure the team is engaged with the whole time. So we're actually having more meetings now and more discussions, even short meetings. So we will meet twice a week, half hour. We're not talking work. It's just to make sure everyone's okay. Someone's introduced a trivia morning. So Thursdays we have a Kahoot trivia morning, and it's just a way of engaging, having a bit of fun with each other, because you miss that, especially when we're spread across 3 offices around the country, plus our state councils are in all the other states. So the reality is it's now more important than ever to remain engaged, really understanding where people are at, because not everyone is coping at this point in time. So giving them the opportunity to open up, communicate, share is I think, really, really critical. Yeah,
I think you're right. And I think, people are all managing at different levels, from not very well to actually I'm flourishing,
Correct. Including leaders, right? There are leaders right now who are not coping with this situation, especially if their own people aren't coping. It's how they cope with those who are not coping.
And sort of, from a leadership perspective, one of the things we touched on a little bit earlier was, the loneliness of being a leader. Probably never more relevant than right at the moment. So, for leaders out there that are struggling and are trying to find a way forward, and you can't really talk to your staff about it, and maybe you're not quite ready to have that conversation with your board, what would be your advice to lonely leaders out there?
And there's certainly a lot of that going on. In my coaching and mentoring side, the number of leaders who really are feeling quite lonely at the moment, as you say, not being able to go and talk to a board, or they certainly can't talk to their staff. And their management team, especially if you're going to have to make cuts to the management team, it's a challenge to consult those people who are going to be impacted by those decisions. So my advice is to find someone, anyone, and that can be professionally or personally, that you can talk to. And you don't necessarily need to have them give you advice, but you do need to have the opportunity to just share those experiences. And sometimes, and the good coaches will know what questions to ask, or are very good listeners, because most leaders, and very good leaders, have the answers. They just need the opportunity to really contemplate, really think through, have a clear mind at this point. I've often said that a crisis is when you need to make your best decisions, and you don't make your best decisions when you're stressed. So it's really important that you do have a very clear head. Find the things that give you that clarity, whether, for me, it's music or reading,
Yep.
or conversation. There's all sorts of different techniques, but it's really important at this point in time to go back to your inner self and ask yourself, okay, what is going to give me that clarity? Who am I going to be able to talk to, or what am I going to be able to do that allow me to get through this? Because it is a very, very lonely time.
Yep.
And we are seeing some really experienced leaders struggling at this time.
Yeah. And you've referenced music a couple of times, Ron. So do you play music or are you just a listener?
I am a musician. I have
there you
been a musician since I think the age of 12, 13.
Right, what do you play?
I play a variety of instruments, so we have a complete studio at home of drums, keyboards, pianos, guitars,
Fantastic.
all sorts of things. And I play in a corporate rock band called Big Kahuna. That we're all business executives, and not that we're playing at the moment, obviously, but we like doing things for charity and just having a bit of fun around music.
Good on you.
Yeah,
that's great. So let's maybe just talk about some of your successes. So, in particular, the work that you did with Melbourne Storm, so from a sport perspective, and then from there you moved into Fed Square. And now you're working for an association, and we can talk about associations a little bit later. But let's maybe talk about some of the learnings and everything from the Melbourne Storm and then into Fed Square.
Yeah, well, I think everyone's very familiar with the Melbourne Storm situation. There was a great team, great coaching group, great players, just a few issues off the field. And I think given what the club was going through at that time, it was really important to stabilise very, very quickly. And my role, as simple as it might seem, was to just create that stability, give the players and the coaching group confidence that we know that they are a very successful group. They were successful prior to the salary cap saga and have been successful since.
Yep.
So it's important at times as an executive to know when to stay out. So at no stage did I interfere with the football operations because they were damn good at what they did.
Yep.
But we had to create stability. We also needed to make sure the stakeholders bought in.
Yep.
So whether they were members, whether they were the NRL, the media, etc. The government, there was all sorts of stakeholders. I'm very big on mind maps, so one of the first things I did was create a mind map of who were the stakeholders, and it was probably one of the more complex mind maps I've ever done.
Right.
So there were many different groups of different personality traits, different characteristics that needed to be addressed, and the important part was to get them back on board, get them to be supportive and leave that past behind. When we drive vehicles, we're destined for an accident if we continue to be fixated on rear vision mirrors.
Yep.
So it's really important to look forward and not be obsessed with the past. So it was very important that we got on with it. Yep. We gave people a level of confidence. For me, it was a great learning experience because I didn't know anything about the game. So for me, it certainly wasn't about the game, and whilst I'm passionate about sport, it's very easy to remain unemotional when you're not passionately engaged.
Yeah, okay. And then Fed Square, what was your experiences at Fed Square?
Well, there's a couple of similar traits with that. When I got to Storm, I had people tell me, you're trying to run us like a business, Ron. We're not a business, we're a footy club. When you've got an owner that's wanting to sell you, you're a business.
Absolutely.
Same with Fed Square. There's a similar experience there where people are saying to me, but Ron, we're a public space, you're trying to run us as a business. Well, when you've got a government that is not wanting to have to pay for everything that goes into your business, and completely run the operations of the business, then you've got to run Fed Square as a business. So we looked at our spaces, we looked at our assets. One of the things I love doing with organisations is helping them identify their assets, even the most obviously unknown can be monetised. And a good example of that at Fed Square was one of the initiatives we brought in on the dark side of Fed Square, beyond those buildings, looking onto the Yarra. That was a dead zone during winter.
Right.
Within 3 weeks, we actually created an ice skating rink and ran it for 3 weeks.
Yeah, right.
And I remember at the time we had something like 90,000 visitors from all over the world. We had 20-odd thousand skaters, and we had more profit made out of that 3 weeks than we had pretty much for the entire year sort of
Yeah,
thing,
right.
as a simple initiative, which then resulted in a water slide in the middle of Fed Square, and just all those little initiatives meant that we identified assets and we monetised those assets, and we had a great team of enthusiastic people who were very, very creative people. And what we did was basically allow that creativity to come through. So we had a number of workshops where we just allowed people to be creative. There was no bad idea. And that was our starting point. So I know that the team felt really vibrant and very excited about that. And we built a new master plan, which we said changing the shape of the square, but play on the Fed Square. And we just changed the nature of the business, and it was an exciting period of time.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, most of your career, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most of your career has sort of been going in and assisting, fixing, redirecting, repositioning and helping companies to do that. One of the experiences that you had was with C2, when we talked a little bit about this on the phone, and you know, really unfortunate that we couldn't get that off the ground here for Melbourne. But we sort of talked a little bit about the fact that they brought you in too late. So for companies out there at the moment that are, you know, potentially need somebody with your expertise, what are some of the sort of signs that, you know, okay, we need a Ron Gauci to come in and help us through this? What would some of the signs be for organisations, do you think?
I think the signs are early. It's a question of how quickly you want to move. But if the signs are we're looking a bit stagnant, or we're not being as creative as we could be, or we're being disrupted, or there's an opportunity for us to disrupt and we're not moving quickly enough, which is a preferred situation. I think, to go back to your question, Anne, I do get brought in a bit late in the crisis situation. I much rather play in the transformation space.
Yeah, right.
And the earlier that I'm engaged, the better, because then you can really give yourself a proper runway. C2 is a classic example. I was told at the time C2 stood for commerce and creativity combined. What I found when I got there, and not too dissimilar to the Fed Square and the Melbourne Storm situation, is that it was almost 100% creativity and no percent commerce. So the business side needed attention, and it was too late at that point. So in answer to your question, I think the earlier the leadership realise there's an opportunity here, and how do we leverage that opportunity, and how do we go into the unknown, and how do we become the disruptor, or whatever term you want to use. That's time to start engaging people like myself, because the rest of it is just a great runway. And you can really have a lot of creativity. The more compelling the crisis, the more action that can happen, but not necessarily the bandwidth to do things.
Yeah, right, okay. And now you're with an association, and we were talking the other day about events, and you were saying that you had increased your events and that you were having some great success in that space. So maybe just talk to our community about that.
Well, I think that one of the things that should come from COVID-19 is the opportunities it's created. I'm really inspired by the number of businesses that have just found new ways of doing things. We're seeing it in the catering space, the hospitality space. We're seeing it in so many different areas, and I think it's been wonderful. So it's no different to our organisation. The Australian Information Industry Association represents ICT companies around Australia. We are very much a membership organisation with an events program. Of course, when COVID kicked in mid-March, that ended our events program, including our international delegations. So we had to find a different way of creating member value, as well as provide member services. The policy and advocacy side of our work, influencing government policy, etc., that was an ongoing thing. That doesn't change. But the event program, we would run around 50 odd events per year. Granted, not that profitably, because of the costs attached to doing that, as you know. You well know. So we had a situation where we needed to create an event program in a virtual manner. We were from the technology industry, so if anyone's likely to come up with a solution, we were. So we actually migrated into that space. Now, at the end of the day, putting something online doesn't solve the problem. The content still needs to be strong.
Absolutely.
The production needs to be strong, and the marketing to the audience needs to be strong. What we've found in the 6 to 7 weeks we've been running the program is we're tracking well ahead of where we were in the physical program or in-person program. Because of the eyeballs we're attracting, we're now attracting people not from just a local audience, we're actually attracting an audience nationally and some internationally.
Yep.
So all of a sudden we have a brand new audience that we're marketing to, therefore more eyeballs, therefore sponsorship, and therefore a new revenue stream without necessarily the cost base.
Yep.
And the speakers we've had have been fantastic. So the new challenge for us as we come out of COVID is how we play the requirement for a physical or in-person event with the successes we've experienced in the virtual environment. And we will run those in parallel.
Yep.
Right? Likewise, we run an iAwards competition for our innovators. We get hundreds of entries per year. We've simplified that dramatically this year,
Yep.
but we normally have an event ceremony.
Yep.
It could well be, depending on restrictions, that we'll run those in parallel and do a production, a virtual award ceremony with some live audience. Either way, I love the opportunity that it creates to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, I think most definitely coming out of this, it will see quite a lot from a hybrid perspective in an event space.
Yeah.
Some of the feedback we have had though with the actual people doing everything virtually is that they're getting an unbelievable reach, but they're not necessarily getting the depth.
Yes, so we went down that path as well. So this is the beauty of it, getting feedback.
Yep.
And it's important that whatever we think we're doing and however well we think we're doing, feedback is always important. So we asked that, and people were saying they weren't getting the depth, they weren't having the opportunity to have a conversation.
Yep.
So when we set out on that path, we said we'll do one event per week till the end of June and see how we went. We ended up doubling that because of the content and the demand. So we ran 2 events. We then introduced the third when we got that feedback, and the third was not a speaker talking to people. It was what we call a networking forum, where a group of people, we tried to limit the numbers in clusters of 10 to 12, to just have a conversation around topics and just talk. And create that virtual networking environment so people could bring their own drinks or whatever. And the conversations were not only quite rich, but there were some really good ideas that came from those conversations. And again, we weren't restricted to the people who were local that could come into a room. We had people from all over the country making up that small group. For me, the best test is when someone at the end says, can we have each other's contact details because we'd like to stay in touch. That to me is a litmus test.
That's great.
And it is good.
Yeah.
So again, creativity comes to the fore here in these situations.
Yeah, fantastic. What would your advice be at the moment for everyone dealing with so much uncertainty and ambiguity, in the business world? What would if you could give, a little nugget of advice, what would that be?
Embrace. Embrace the opportunity. I think we can panic. I think we can become conservative. I think we can become overcautious. Not to say that you become reckless, but you do need to make some calculated decisions at this point in time. But this is now an opportunity. This is an opportunity for opportunity, if you like.
Yep.
Okay, so embrace it. And the good leaders know how to. They'll look at something. They'll determine what the risks are, what the challenges are, but they'll also determine what the opportunity is.
Yep.
And then they'll calculate the risks and they'll pursue an opportunity. And you do that, again, by embracing it.
Yeah, fantastic. Associations.
Yep.
We've seen a number of associations start to struggle in this environment from a membership fee. People are really being very cautious with their money spend.
Yep.
What do you think the future for some associations are? Is now the time to have some mergers, do you think?
So this is really radical because I've been an advocate of this even in our own industry.
Yep.
we have so many associations.
We do.
And so many member organisations. And if you were to do a Venn diagram of the overlaps, you find that there are quite a few organisations who are members of like organisations, particularly in our industry. We've got ministers telling us we need to consolidate and be one voice. And I've been an advocate of that. I really think that there are too many associations, too many organisations, too many membership fees. And we're seeing this trend all over the world, not just in professional associations, even memberships for sporting clubs are being challenged at the moment as to where your discretionary spend is. So I think it's an opportunity for I guess, an aggregation and consolidation. But I also think that at the end of the day, an association for the sake of being an association means nothing. Now's a really important time to ask yourself, well, who are my members? What do they want from me? What am I delivering that's really of value? And if it's niche, that's all terrific. But we're seeing that as an issue. The other thing I'm seeing as an issue is a lot of the associations are made up of a small number of people, usually volunteers because they don't have the commercial, I guess, impetus, and they're trying to do big things. So aggregating those resources now, even if it's just a shared service back end, but aggregating resources means you can do more with more when you're playing with more.
Totally agree. One of the things that a lot of people are doing at the moment is sort of negotiating. So that could be negotiating leases, home loans, all sorts of things. So there's a lot in terms of negotiation going on in the world at the moment. Any key words of advice for our community on negotiation? You're known for your negotiation skills, Ron. So.
I was very fortunate in a younger day to be coached by what's recognised as the world leaders in negotiating with David Lax and Jim Sabinas. And there's a great book, 3D Negotiations, by them. And I was trained by them. And what I learnt was some basic concepts, but very complex execution of really truly understanding the other party, putting yourself in their shoes. But the 3D negotiating model is really about creating value for all parties, not just what you want out of it. I often use the example, people say you're after a win-win. I can give you what you want and I get what I want, but at the end of the day we're still not satisfied because a win-win is far too simple. I think it's got to be an opportunity where we derive some real value out of this so that there's an ongoing. You might be negotiating something for the now, might be a lease. But how do you create that into a value proposition for all parties longer term so that the relationship continues? Because at the end of the day, a negotiation isn't just a single event. It can be the formulation of a longer term relationship. So really understanding what the other person wants out of this. And I find in the negotiations that I'm involved in and I get brought in to negotiate at times, it can be personal as well as professional. There are times when a person is motivated by a personal matter. And I've seen that in business quite frequently. So it's really important to have that ability to ask the right questions, probe, understand, empathy, and then that vision of, okay, how do I now create real value for us all out of this so that there's a longer term outcome here, not just a single negotiation. Have I answered that?
Absolutely. You touched on, somebody's asked a question around empathy and leading with empathy. What their question is, how would you lead from an empathetic perspective with your current team?
Well, again, I think it's about understanding. Right. So I think well, it starts with trust. So trust takes a lifetime to build and a moment to lose, and often never recover from it. So there's a little exercise I do with red and black cards that highlight how quickly you can lose trust in a negotiation. And I can usually prove it within 10 minutes that you can actually create enough doubt in a person's mind that they don't believe that you're being empathetic. They don't believe that you're actually sincere about your intentions. I think it's really important to be the best person you can be, to truly be trusting, to really create that connection with the person, and that's where empathy is derived. But it certainly, for me, it starts with the trust.
Yeah.
And I take a lot of pride in the fact that I think trust and reputation and credibility has been quite critical.
Yeah, more so than ever now.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Any final words of advice for our viewers out there today that you would like
On
to
which
share?
particular aspect? You've covered so
I
many
know
with
we
your
have
questions.
actually. It's been fantastic. Actually, we have covered everything. I don't know. I suppose if there was, one piece of advice that you could give our sort of community, what would it be?
I think, given the nature of the questions you've asked and the situation that people are going through at the moment, the one thing that I will always offer as advice is have the right people around you.
Yeah,
So
right.
even from a hiring point of view,
Yep.
I will always hire people who can do their job better than I can.
Yep.
Now, some managers, and there's a difference between leadership and management,
Yep.
but some leaders and managers are threatened by that.
Yep.
So I will always hire people who can do their job better than I do.
Yep.
And then empower them to get the job done. If you've got the right people around you, and you only need one skill, that's to hire well, and then keep well, right? So if you have the right people around you, there's so much you can achieve, because the power of many can be quite significant. So for me, it's always been about the people I've had around me. And the only time I think I've ever failed in a business, and I do recall once many decades ago, is where I hired people who I could afford instead of people who could do the job.
Yeah, right.
And in small business, you are often hiring people who you can afford, and then you end up working in the business instead of on the business, because you're doing what they should be doing.
Yeah, really sound advice. Final question for today. What's one thing that you'll never take for granted again?
Oh, great question. I think my first reaction is the liberties, but I then marry that with, we've got fantastic people around us, if I come back to that comment, and staying in touch with them, the opportunity to embrace them, and I'm very touchy-feely, so the hugging and all that sort of stuff. I think we can learn a lot from this period of time. So love the people around you, look after the people around you, let them know how you feel, and never take that for granted. I think might not be a professional answer for you, but that's a simple one for you.
Doesn't need to be professional. Ron Gauci, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been incredibly insightful. We covered a lot of ground, so thanks for that.
Appreciate it.
That's all right. And take care, stay safe.
Thank you. You too.